Welcome to the Imagine More session on finding the right support using a roles-based recruitment approach. And because we've got a strong focus on roles today, we thought this demonstrates it beautifully. This is Chloe doing Taekwondo. And so this is a role where she's taken up in the community, embedded in regular and typical community. And you can see how then that defines who she is. So when people are introducing themselves, like you can imagine when we're at a party and you're meeting someone for the first time and you ask them what they do, you're really trying to get a sense of who the person is. And we usually then respond in role language. So I'll take you through what we mean by that. And it will sort of help you with then recruiting people in a complementary role position, so they really are clear on what they're trying to achieve walking alongside a person with disability. So this is my son Jack, and this is the vision statement that we have for him. And you will see in his vision that we've identified in the bold font some of the roles that Jack, we see him holding now, or this is actually a few years old now, this vision statement, and also some roles that we think that he will want to aspire to later in life. So I highlighted those because that's sort of going to take us through the rest of the presentation around where we're going to be focusing on while we're thinking about recruiting a support worker. So this vision statement here is one that we reflect on each year and really work now with Jack around what he sees his vision for a life to look like. And as you can see, it's very typical for any young person, with or without disability, we would hope. So, of course, it definitely starts with a vision. If you haven't got a clear vision statement for your son or daughter, I think this is a really good place to start. So when I mentioned that we were focusing on roles today, it's actually really important that we start thinking in role language rather than activities. And we do that because, one, it actually helps us understand who the person is. Because when we talk about the things that we do, you know, I'm an executive director of Imagine More, I'm a mother, I'm a runner. Notice that they're all ending in ER words. So if you've often been talking about activities, just put an ER on the end and then you'll be talking in role language. What a role also can do is open the door to where that role can take a person. So there's usually a lot of activities that even sit within a role. So if we can start thinking in that way, it can potentially open the door for a lot more ways for a person to be participating in the community. So when we craft the vision for Jack and we go back and reflect on it, we start thinking about where some paid support can be helpful, because we don't actually want to fill his life full of paid supports. We actually really want to make sure we are also investing in people that are in his life in a freely given way, because that way we're investing in the future, because paid supports will come and go, whereas informal supports and freely given supports we would hope would be there for the long run. So some questions that we considered was, well, what will it take for our son to realise his vision for the future? And what valued roles will we actually focus on for the next year? Because we're not really focusing on Jack, you know, getting married, for example. We're not focusing on him moving out of home just yet. But some of the things that we were focusing on were bike riding, building his skills around soccer, joining the gym. So a lot of it was around his health and well-being, but we were always thinking about, well, where in the community could that happen, where he will meet other people and build relationships. So as you can see, I've taken an excerpt of part of Jack's vision, and we've pulled some of the goals out of there. So the soccer player, the jiu-jitsu student, and neighbour. Often being a neighbour is a great place to start. We all live somewhere and we all have neighbours, and thinking about how you can help your son and daughter be more involved in their community, and how they can be a really good neighbour. You know, it could be taking the bins out for someone or bringing them back in if they're away, collecting mail, sharing some food. One thing that we did is that we started hosting a Neighbour Day gathering every year, because there is actually an event in late March for Neighbour Day. Unfortunately, it didn't happen this year because of COVID, but it's something that we have invested in, and we've really seen some beautiful reciprocity. Another area was around Jack becoming a reader, mountain bike rider, and lifeguard. They were all things that were important to him back in 2016. So just for the purpose of this session today, we're just going to focus on the role of being a bike rider. Jack, before the NDIA came into his life, wasn't riding a bike, but we could see that this was going to be very important to him in getting around the community, but also we could see a really good opportunity within his school to join the mountain bike riding club, where he would become a regular and frequent member and give him an opportunity to build more relationships. So in order to be a bike rider, he needed independence to ride to and from school, to the gym, to the local pool, and to the shops. And of course, the ultimate goal was to become a member of the mountain bike riding club at the school. So we needed to work out, well, what kind of skills did he need to develop? Firstly, it was transitioning from the scooter to a bike, and then what did that entail? So you can see there in the image where he's coming down a very slight incline with no pedals on the bike. So that was starting with a small bike. He had to learn then to pedal when the pedals went back on, how to brake, how to steer, how to start off from a stationary position. But then he also needed to learn about road safety. And it's very easy to have people just accompanying a person rather than teaching them what the rules are. So regular practice on the same route was really important. And so not only there's road safety rules, there's also bike path rules here in Canberra. So he needed to understand what those meant. So when we were looking at who could help, in the brackets there you can see some of the different people we considered. So I think now that all our family members have got funding in their life through the NDIS, it's really easy to just put paid support in place. But I would really encourage everyone, and I have to keep reminding our family as well, is to look for the informal supports first, because we really need to provide those opportunities for regular community members, family members and friends to be in a person's life as well. So they're just some of the things that we came up with. So the purpose of today and the main focus is actually identifying what the complementary paid role would be. So rather than just saying, I'm going to employ a support worker, it made sense to us to think about, well, actually, I think this person, if they're going to be helping with bike riding, with soccer, with jiu-jitsu, it's sort of more of a sports coach role rather than just a support worker. And when you employ someone with a particular title like that, it actually helps them understand what their job is. So we were looking for someone that was energetic and fit, was quite calm in lots of different situations, very encouraging, really confident, but really important that the person was quite humble. We've learnt over the years, actually, Jack gravitates to staff when they're actually quite humble and fairly quiet, but very confident in supporting him. They needed to be skilled in bike riding, of course, and other sports such as soccer. We thought it was important that the person would be relatively young because we knew that was a real motivator for Jack. He didn't want to do things with his parents, so why would we get somebody sort of similar to our age to take up that role? They needed to be solution-focused, easygoing and flexible. So then it came time to advertise once we'd identified what the role was. Now, this is just one example. This is actually the job ad that we used, looking for a job, sports coach. As you can see, it was very, very simple. I think what was most important was working out where we would actually advertise, which I'll get to that. So on the left, you can see over here the job advertisement here. We've got this Word document that we can share with you afterwards, and it gives yet another example of what the job ad could look like. We then needed to decide, well, where would we advertise? And rather than just sort of going on to Seek or Gumtree, we wanted to be a little bit more targeted. So some of the things that we came up with is through family and friends, family members who might know somebody, people that we've met through sports activities, and looking at the relevant university lecturers if you happen to be in a city or a town where there is a university or a CIT. So we actually put Jack's job ad up in building 13 or something like that at the University of Canberra because we understood by talking to some young people where the sports science lectures were happening, and we put it on bright yellow paper so it would stand out from all the rest of the ads that were up there and pop that up there. We also looked at schools, we looked at the local community notice boards, swimming pools. We looked at the Majura Soccer Club because it was local and we wanted somebody that was skilled in soccer. So that's the kind of thinking we want people to embrace. And if you don't get any nibbles from there, then you can go on to the more sort of generic places like Facebook or Seek. Another thing that people have tried is going on to Higher Up and putting an ad on there. I'm not sure whether Neighbour does the same, and there's probably some other platforms now that you can also use. So then when the person emails us, and I might stop this here and then share another screen with you where I'll show you what this looks like for the next couple of... Now I'm just going to find it. So this is the where to advertise one, which I just showed you. So I'll stop using that one. Sorry, I'm so used to using Webinar Jam, I'm still getting my head around using this one. Okay, so when they email us, we will then send them an information pack. So this information pack, I'll show you the male one. We've done it so it's in male and female language. So then if you get it in a Word document, it's already using that language. So basically you just insert the name where it suits in the brackets, And it just gives you a bit of an outline of what the actual role might look like, some relationships that the person might need to be connecting with. And then this is where we introduce that the person happens to have a disability in amongst many other different attributes and roles, where we try and help the person understand who Jack is. We actually don't use the person's name, so we would just put, like, say, an initial, just so we're de-identifying it until it gets to the next stage. So then it goes in here, it talks a bit about the setup of where this funding is coming from and what the SHADS award would be in the hourly rate if they're directly employing somebody. If you're using HireUp or something, you can pretty much just pull that out of here. You don't necessarily have to use it. But because we've directly employed people, that was really important to include. Then it would go into a bit of general information around the job description. And this is where it's going to be really unique to each of you, but this hopefully will give you some ideas of the types of things that you can include. And then there's a bit of a duty statement that's fairly generic for any particular role that a person might be recruiting for. So it's all about social inclusion, and they're just sort of themes that might help you flesh out what's important to you and your family member with disability. So communication, what's really important for the person with communication, but also communication with you as the employer or the person engaging them. How the mentoring will work, how that they're a very important role model, therefore their personal appearance is very important because that will reflect on the person with disability. How people will maintain records, safety, if there's certain things that people need to be aware of, you can pop that in here. And if, for example, people are using some equipment that belong to the family, to be for them to be really careful with that. There's usually a focus on some essentials such as the values, and at the end of this you'll see a vision statement, the values and vision statement, and how that person's to uphold those. Some of the skills that will be really important but are usually fairly generic, and you can sort of play with these, of course. Some personal attributes that will be really important. And again, like if you're employing someone as a job mentor compared to a sports coach, they might be very different in some of the things that they need to have. And then you've got your vision statement and so you'll see that looks different to Jack's actual vision statement, but we've pulled out some pretty important values that are critical, or we see as really important for anyone that's going to be working alongside or working with our son. So that's just that one. And then they send through their application. Oh, another tip too that we probably didn't have added on that, but we will do a little edit. Down the bottom of that information pack, you can put something like, in your selection criteria, please tell me what your favourite colour is. So if they don't include that, they may have forgotten, but it also might help you understand whether they've actually read the whole information pack or not. That could be a good way of just sort of sifting through some applications. So here's just this one's for a job mentor, not a sports coach actually, but we're trying to build a number of them so it makes it easier for people. Because if you're like me, I don't like reinventing the wheel. I like borrowing from others. So this is just a very simple application where they just give some information about themselves, then some response to the job description and selection criteria, 2 referees that they can pop in there, and then you can alter this to what's important to you. If you don't think you need to know whether they've had a criminal record, you don't have to include that. If you think it's really important that they've got a driver's license, you know, you can sort of add to it as appropriate. So once they send that in, then you obviously make your decision. And what we did, I'll just go back to my presentation here, is we did an interview, and this is where we involved Jack. So we actually met with a few people, but we would meet them in a neutral place, so down at the local oval, and if possible they could bring a bike, or I would ride down there with Jack. They could borrow the bike, or they could just actually, what they did is have a bit of a kick of the soccer ball, so I could then watch what was happening, and I could then see how they were going to interact with Jack, what sort of language they used, the tone of voice that they used, and also see whether there's sort of any rapport in those initial moments. Then you can take a photo of the person. That's really helpful for then Jack making a decision later on. Once we then decided on who the person was, we then met that person in a cafe, just to learn a little bit more about them, share a little bit more about what we hope to achieve for Jack, and then we'd start working on the induction process. So for the induction form, which I'll just talk to, it just goes through some things like, what do they need to know the week before they start working with your family member or yourself? What do they need to know the week after they've been doing this, and then beyond that? So the outcomes for Jack when we did, so that was in 2016. Jack is now riding everywhere independently. He rides to school by himself, and he's navigating Northbourne Avenue, where most of you in Canberra know that we've also got a tram going down the middle of it, so he's able to navigate that. He did join the school mountain bike riding club, but what we then learnt was actually it's all fine to ride a bike, but learning to ride it on gravel and down and up hills is another whole lot of skills that we need to work on. So, you know, I just think having those goals, it actually helped us retain the staff because they knew what they were working towards. It improved his health and fitness. He's bike riding with the whole family, and he's now got that independence to get around the community. So I think by using the role focus has really helped us, not only for bike riding, but for many other different roles that we have actually engaged staff with. So that's just a bit of a snapshot. It's pretty quick to go through, but if you've got any questions, or if you want me to go through any of those forms in a bit more detail, yeah, fire away. We were actually funded by NDS, when was that? Last year, to do a project on roles-based recruitment where we helped 5 different people recruit a staff member. And one of those people did develop a pack basically around a social connector. So I can get in touch with them and see if they're happy for us to share that. But it's something that we're wanting to build, like a number of different forms for. So then if sort of a sports coach makes sense, then they can download that. If a job mentor makes sense, they can download that, because it just helps you do some thinking around it. And I know we've had people on previously that have talked about, using their networks, but, sometimes you can exhaust that as well. So this is just one other way that you can be doing it out to the broader community and hopefully find someone. I think we get a bit worried about thinking that the community is not safe. We're safer to go to services, but just remember that everyone that are a part of services have come from somewhere, and you're probably going to give them a lot more training than what a service provider might. So, and you have a lot more control over who that person is coming into your life in that paid capacity, when they can come in, how they come in, and what they do and when. So that's sort of where we've found it really helpful, having that more control over that. And I know all of the people that were part of that project. We had Brian. He was a gentleman that had a disability later in life. He used to be a professional drummer and he wanted to get back into that. So he ended up engaging a drumming assistant. And really what that was, it was where he needed the help was actually helping someone get everything set up, especially if he was going to gigs. It wasn't so much about, he knew how to drum and he was teaching, because he lost the use of one arm, so he had to, teach himself how to do it again. But yeah, it was a fantastic outcome for him. There was a young girl that engaged a sports coach, a young man that engaged a job mentor, and there was a lady that engaged a homemaker because she needed more support around the home. So there's some sort of examples that that we supported people into. But yeah, it was using those forms and that process to help them do thinking. When we engaged Alfonso, we started paying him once he started doing the work with Jack. So we didn't actually pay him for the interviews or even meeting us at the cafe. But once we actually got him to sign his contract, then that's when we started paying him. But we shouted him, a meal at the cafe. So I think that that's fairly typical. I think if you're unsure, just go back to what would be typical. I know my daughter has just gone for a job interview and she's had to go in a few times and none of that's been paid for. Whereas my other daughter that did a trial shift, she was paid for that. So whether she was going to get that job or not, she was still paid for the trial shift. So you could set it up in that way. Another approach that I know Cherie Henley uses is a group interview. So they get their circle of support to run a group interview where they give lots of activities to the potential employees and they just watch. I think there's usually several circle members present and they were all watching for different things. That's usually for like someone that's going to be doing a lot of work with their son, where the stakes are a bit higher. And it's just a good way of doing it, especially if you've got quite a few applications and, that can actually be quite time consuming in doing the interviews. So it's one way of addressing that. Just with regards to the life skills, I think all of our kids will need that. We all need that. But I think if you can try and hone it, like you just did, you said catching public transport. So, whether that's like I would be thinking, where would you want them to catch public transport to? So when Jack was learning to catch the bus, he was actually going to work. So there was a purpose for it. Whereas, or if he was going to meet someone in town. So I'd be sort of really thinking about like unpacking what the life skills might be, because then that would help you describe that much better to the person you're trying to engage. So then they've got a clearer understanding of what that is, because that they probably may not be sure. I was really nervous as well. We'd never used any services before the NDIS came. And I just made sure that, you know, for quite a while, we would just have the person coming to the house. So I'd be around. I mean, I was working from home there, so I'd be able to watch the interactions, you know, from a distance. And then you'd then start going, okay, well, maybe you could go over to the wetlands or go somewhere not too far away. So they're starting to branch out, like just baby steps until, you know, you build that confidence. I know it is tricky around the, you know, being driven around. You've got to build that initial trust.